Do what does heroin, aspirin, methadone, and cocaine have in common? Watch this brief timeline to find out. Dr. B 360, and recently I have covered some opiate topics, including what medication assisted treatment should look like. And I've also covered briefly the history of methadone. I've covered other topics like euphoric index. You can go back to my recent videos to check those out. Today, I want to sort of close that, which I think of as an opiate marketing art. Let's just start with this question. And as some of you may know the answer, who invented heroin? Okay, uh, here's the answer. Heroin was actually, a lot of people will say Germans, but no, there was a British doctor 10 years before the Germans, 20 years before the Germans, that actually came up with the structure and was able to produce, as he would, uh, heroin. But he never went anywhere with it. In the 1890s, German pharmaceutical company Bayer, as you all know, Bayer aspirin, came up with heroin, with the doctor who made the term heroin. That it really, the whole lab tried it out, and they felt heroic, and hence heroin. Now it's interesting because around the same time, the same company, Bayer aspirin, as you know them, Bayer, came out with aspirin. So they came up with heroin and aspirin around the same time. Heroin was marketed as this safer, gentler alternative to morphine, non addicting. It was used also as a cough suppressant with less side effects and less addiction potential than codeine. And it was marketed as such. And and that was in 1898 that they discovered heroin, and we know the rest of that history in terms of how it was abused and how addicting it is. It was unfortunate that soon there was a war, a world war, and there was a lot of trauma, injury, and pain. And that really probably had quite a bit to do with it, with the rise of heroin abuse. Now, keep in mind, heroin at that point, for the most part, all these years, it's being marketed as a non addicting cough suppressant. And this was also very important because you also have tuberculosis at that time, right? And safer, gentler alternative to morphine. And heroin is diacetyl morphine, right? It has two acetyl groups. And it was marketed to adults and children. Now, at the side of this, I also want to let you know that Merck Pharmaceuticals had discovered or created cocaine and was really mass producing this stuff and and using different indications and labels through the late 19th century and early 20th century, and putting cocaine out there. And their big sort of superstar, uh, interestingly, advocate for cocaine for mood enhancement and other indications that turned out to be wrong, was Sigmund Freud. He was a big proponent of it. So we got Merck in the 1860s. They discovered cocaine. They put it out there for all kinds of stuff, including surgical anesthetic, but also, really, if you think about it, it's the first mood enhancer or drug to engineer how you feel. And a big proponent and fan of it was Sigmund Freud, which probably had a lot to do with the spread and use of cocaine, especially in Europe at those early times. Let's go back to. I really want to focus more on the opiate marketing arc here. So we got this whole thing with heroin, Bayer aspirin puts out heroin. Now, interestingly, we come all the way up and we get methadone in 1937. I suspect right? Another pharmaceutical company, another chemist or pharmacologist. And I suspect by that time, the Germans, it's kind of weird, because, uh, you're going from heroin to methadone. And a lot of that, again, was driven by the market. I think partly they probably saw what was going on with heroin, but also it demanded the Germans to come up with their own pain medication during the war. Obviously, you need the pain medication during the war, but it's also an issue of them being able to procure the supply from other countries when they're at war with every country and getting the regular pain medications. And in between all of this, in 1917 or 1918, Merck also came up with oxycodone, Eucodol, okay? Strong analgesic, smoother than morphine, which is actually true, okay? It wasn't pushed as a cough syrup for suppressing cough. It was sort of the precision opiate, clinical, modern, civilized control, right? And non-addicting, quote unquote, as well, as it always goes that way. It was a refinement of morphine. So oxycodone was actually originally discovered by the Germans, Merck as well. And then later, IG Farben came up with methadone in 1937. So it's really interesting to see the development of these opiates over time. You start off with heroin, late 19th century by Bayer aspirin, oxycodone by Merck, right, 1917, and then methadone, 1937, right? And these are all pharmaceuticals, right? And so, I think what's important to note, understanding the historical context, you can look at this in a couple of ways. You can turn around and say, all pharmaceutical companies are bad. They're evil. They're the devil. And I would say they're, they are, it's not pharmaceutical companies that are bad. It is what capitalism is. They need a market. They need to sell. They need to find a market, create one if needed. And that is what corporate capitalistic setup does, right? And would it have been better if they didn't discover heroin, if they didn't discover oxycodone? Because I will also say right now, or even cocaine, right, with Merck, I will also say that every one of these substances has utility and can be used in the right way. The issues, the issue is not that oxycodone or heroin are these evil manufactured substances that the public uses and goes crazy on and creates addiction and destroys lives. You have to understand these things are not created in a vacuum. It is in the context of the marketing, the availability, and the social attitudes. And these attitudes are all really created for you, your belief system, your approach to something, and then the availability of it. These are all social structures that are essentially created for you by these companies. So I can sit here and say today that I would love to be able to have in my medication assisted treatment arsenal, whether it's oxycodone or pharmaceutical grade heroin, because in many ways, heroin is much smoother than morphine, right? But I want to treat addiction. I want to get people to get off of illicit substances and get them off of having control over those decisions and then be able to work with them and put them on a substance and get into a state of non addiction. So, I wrote this narrative out not to indict the pharmaceutical companies, not at all. Because if you're looking at this the right way, you're not going to jump the gun to that conclusions that these guys are bad. They are what they are. And I have discussed this in other places. They are what they are. History has gone the way it has. We are where we are. What can we do to be able to A, treat the ones that are suffering from substance abuse and addiction and polypharmacy? And then B, what can we do in the future to make sure that the corporations, the pharmaceutical corporations or any corporation, doesn't have that kind of a pull to create your belief system and your reality, and you are an educated consumer with all of your products, not just substances. And that's the point of understanding the historical context of all of this. But if you look at this video and say, see, I told you pharmaceutical companies are evil, you missed the point, right? All corporations act the way they do, and it is what it is. And now it's up to us, it's up to you to be educated, wise consumer regarding your own health and the medications you put in your body. And that doesn't mean you discard the professionals. And no, the professionals are not in the pocket of big pharma or the FDA. Most individuals are trying to do the best they can with the tools they have. That's what you need to understand. Things aren't black and white, and there is a whole spectrum of behavior and choices to be made with each one of these products. I hope you enjoyed that. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, it helps the channel grow. I'll see you guys soon. Peace.